Welcome to the Sloth Investor Podcast with your host, Mr. Sloth.
The information on this podcast is provided for education and informational purposes only. The information contained in or provided from or through this podcast is not intended to be and does not constitute advice of any kind. Welcome everyone to episode 21 of the Sloth Investor Podcast, an investing podcast that explores why I believe the humble sloth is the best animal to characterize successful investing. Once again, I'm joined by my fellow sloth investor and co-host Jay. Jay, how are you?
The weather is absolutely spectacular here right now. It's so unusual for this time of year in Hong Kong. I can't be anything but happy because when you consider we're on holiday, perfect weather, we deserve this.
The weather has been gorgeous, so sunny and nice breeze here and there. Excuse me. Lovely, lovely weather indeed. So Jay, it's episode 21.
21, that's crazy.
21 episodes going strong. And Jay, before you know it, we'll be reaching a quarter century of podcasts. And now I think we can both agree that for some reason, when you and I get together to discuss investing, we often form analogies between a world of cinema and the realm of investing.
That's you. You do that. Absolutely. I'm not an aficionado like you, but that is definitely on you because you know your stuff when it comes to music and movies.
Yeah, and hence the title of today's podcast, Lights, Camera, Inaction. Okay, and given that the Academy Awards, the Oscars, took place a few weeks ago, it seems fitting that we should devote an entire episode to connections between a world of cinema and the domain of investing. So Jay, this year's Oscars were certainly eventful.
Well, memorable. I'm not a watcher of it, but I definitely tuned into when the news started to break what was going on there.
Unbelievable events. And Jay, can we just confirm once and for all for our listeners that we will not be making comments about the hairlines of either of our respective wives?
Well, now that you say that, there goes my script. I'm out. I'm going to pack up and I'm gone, guys. I'm out of here.
That's it. Well, shortest podcast episode later. Guys, we're joking. Okay, but you know, Jay, after the incident, I thought back to my younger years and any connections to Will Smith. So regular listeners will know that I've got quite an eclectic taste in music. There have been multiple references to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones.
They're both British, right? Everything, a lot of what you reference seems to be British. I wonder what the connection there is.
And you know, I'm going to turn to American. So in terms of Will Smith, it was 1997. Okay, I bought a Will Smith album named Big Willie Style. On the album, there's a cover of Just the Two of Us by Grover Washington Jr. So originally sung by Grover Washington Jr., but Will Smith, of course, covered it. And there's a set of lyrics on Will Smith's version of Just the Two of Us that perhaps indicates how far society's moved since 1997. Let me read them now. It's a full-time job to be a good dad. You got so much more stuff than I had. I got to study just to keep with the changing times. 101 Dalmatians on your CD-ROM. Okay, so it's not an investor movie, but 101 Dalmatians. There's our first movie reference of the day. My kids recently watched it on Disney+, but perhaps more importantly though, 101 Dalmatians on your CD-ROM? Those lyrics are now 25 years old. Wow, society has changed, Jay. When's the last time you used a CD-ROM?
I've got to share a story with you. This is so, it perfectly fits to sort of your... what you were just talking about there. My daughter, probably about 10 years ago when Apple Music first came out, I made the decision to go completely digital. We got rid of all of our DVDs, our CDs, and Netflix was just sort of coming into its own. And my daughter might have been about 8 years ago. My daughter might have been about 4 years old. And I found an old DVD and I pulled it out and I showed it to her and we were sitting at the dinner table and she just started to look at it and she's like, wow, this is amazing. She could see a reflection in it. And she's like, Dad, this is incredible. It's so beautiful. What is it? But it is just a sign of how far we've come in such a short period of time that everybody used to have DVDs and CDs and that was the sort of the mode of media sharing. And now she had no idea what it was. She had never seen one before, and I'm not sure she's seen one since.
Yeah, it is incredible. I mean, mentioned British bands for the Stones and Beatles. I'm a big fan of Queen as well, and I often play my kids' Live Aid, their performance from Live Aid, often seen as, the greatest live performance of all time. my son's a big fan of Radio Gaga. He was, hey, can you play Radio Gaga? Play Radio Gaga. And then just the other day, he turned to me and said, hey, Dad, what's a radio? I mean, what's a radio? I mean, to make me feel old. So I had to then spend a few minutes explaining to my son what a radio actually is. So,
another quick side story. My daughter, we were traveling in Canada and we're listening to the radio. She's like, oh, Dad, I like that song. Play it again. I'm like, no, I can't do this. The radio. No, just rewind it and play it again. Like, it doesn't work like that on the radio. I don't get it. What's going on? Just play the song again.
It's incredible. Times have changed and the times have changed. That's for sure. So, Jay, during this podcast, we'll certainly reference some investor movies that many of you will be familiar with, but we'll also make several perhaps maybe unconventional connections between the world of cinema and the world of investing. So Jay, when you and I begin talking about movies, we inevitably get to that 9-letter T word. I think you know the one I'm talking about.
Yes, probably the one director where I can recognize him stylistically from his movies, Tarantino.
Absolutely, Jay. That's indeed correct. And, I'm not sure there are many podcasts that are able to transition from 101 Dalmatians to Pulp Fiction, but are you ready to attempt it?
Well, what I like about this is it's a natural and a seamless transition, and I can't see where the people would say it doesn't connect. But on the other side of that, I loved Pulp Fiction. I absolutely thought Pulp Fiction was a brilliant movie, and one of those few movies that made me have that, whoa, my gosh, mind-blowing. It all came together.
Absolutely. And in a key scene in Pulp Fiction, Butch, character played by Bruce Willis, sits at a traffic light when he locks eyes with Marcellus Wallace, a mob boss, okay, that he is seeking to flee from. Jay, do you remember that scene?
I don't remember that scene, but I'll tell you, after us talking about Pulp Fiction a bit now, that I'm inspired to go back and look for this scene. Tell me more about it.
So check it out. So basically, if I remember correctly, Butch, played by Bruce Willis, he's stolen some money. He's kind of double-crossed Marcellus Wallace. It's linked to a boxing fight, and he's kind of double-crossed this mob boss. And he's at a set of traffic lights. And the scene was actually inspired by a similar scene in Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 movie Psycho, in which the lead character, Marion Crane, making her escape after stealing a significant amount of money from her place of work, notices her boss as she crosses the street as her car is parked at a traffic light. Now, I hear you ask, well, what has this got to do with investing? Well, in my opinion, seeking to invest without suffering volatility is akin to wanting to drive without experiencing red traffic lights. So, given their encounters, the respective characters of Butch in Pulp Fiction and Marion in Psycho, they both obviously wanted to avoid stopping at a red traffic light. But of course, it is a necessary element, a precondition, if you will, for one's ability to drive. It is important to remember, though, that stopping at a red traffic light is a temporary measure, and then you can simply move on. Likewise, with market volatility, your ability to compound temporarily stops, and then it resumes. Even the most successful investors, be they Warren Buffett or Jack Bogle, are unable to avoid the red traffic lights of the investment world. So, paradoxically, of course, one could argue that the red traffic lights of the investment world possess a key benefit in that they enable investors to purchase stocks at lower price. So, put simply, rather than allowing market volatility to deter you from investing, you must recognize that it's part of the territory of being an investor. Through your investing lifetime, you'll experience numerous volatile periods of stock price movement, and significant bear markets will definitely affect the value of your portfolio. How you behave during these events will define your success as an investor. Jay, firstly, any thoughts on this analogy? And secondly, I know you're a fan of the movie, so what's your favorite scene in Pulp Fiction?
Okay, so to answer the question, what's my favorite scene from Pulp Fiction? Well, a couple key things that sort of stick out in my mind. The dialogue where they were talking about the Little Big Mac. That was classic. The back and forth between the two, and that was the first time I've ever seen in a movie where they're just sort of sitting there, and just the whole scene was carried around just the two sitting there talking. Nothing else is really going on except for this dialogue, which was again akin to very much what Quentin Tarantino's style is very much like. Some key phrases like "Zed's dead," those sort of stick out to me. But probably one of the things that your question was the analogy to volatility. Well, in the end, there was throughout the movie Pulp Fiction, there's all this up and down and this stress, and at the end, it all comes together. And my hope is that right now, my portfolio is going through some volatility. Yeah. But my hope is if I stick through, just like if you stick through the movie Pulp Fiction and watch it all the way through to the end, it all makes sense and it all comes together. Well, if I see through, I remain headstrong, that my portfolio will, when it comes time, when I need that money, that I've been able to ignore the noise and stick it out and stay headstrong, and it will all come together, and I'll be much more happier on the other side of it.
I like it. And something that just occurred to me as well, it's just kind of the structure, the narrative, the plot structure of the movie is kind of non-linear, because the conventional structure of a movie is, the beginning, the middle, the end. But Pulp Fiction just throws that out the window. It's so
That's the first time I'd ever seen that in a movie.
Yeah, so unusual. And again, I guess, like you say, link into investing. You cannot expect that straight line. You're going to see bumps. Things are going to see pretty, non-linear things may not make sense, but stick through it. And, as with Pulp Fiction, things will begin to make sense, absolutely. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe actually several of the cast appeared at the recent Oscars, and just kind of as a homage to Pulp Fiction. I think it was like their 20th anniversary. I think there was a criticism I read online like, do we celebrate now 28th anniversaries? It's not even like a number in zero. But for me, always celebrate Pulp Fiction. Even if it is a random number like 28, those guys are always welcome on stage. I think it was Uma Thurman, John Travolta, maybe Sam Jackson. So Samuel Jackson appeared on stage, but it's good to see those guys back on stage at the Oscars recently.
Groundbreaking movie.
Groundbreaking, that's for sure. So Dre, I guess that was quite an unconventional reference to the realm of investing that I made there, connecting Pulp Fiction to our need to remain patient, to stay the course. So let's go down a little bit more of a conventional route now. So Jay, can you tell us about one of your favorite investing-themed movies?
Well, the two most recent ones that maybe our listeners can identify with are probably The Wolf of Wall Street with Leonardo DiCaprio, but The Big Short.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, The Big Short was fantastic, and it was an amazing story as much as it was scary.
Yeah.
It was very enlightening for me. It was very enlightening for me. What did you think of The Big Short?
I loved it. I mean, what a stellar cast too as well. Brad Pitt, Ryan Gosling, Christian Bale. Is it Steve Carell? Is that right? Steve Carell
yes,
was in it as
he
well.
was in it too. Yeah.
Great cast, and just gives you a really good insight into like the dealings, the thought processes of the industry at that time with the financial crisis. Of course, Michael Berry played a key role there. Just fascinating movie. Really fascinating indeed to see that. Really was. And I guess one of those classics would be Wall Street. When you think about investing movies, I think back to the mid-1980s, Charlie Sheen, Michael Douglas. I think it came out in 1985, the year of Mrs. Sloth's birthday, if anyone is interested. But yeah, the year she was born. But I mean...
What was the phrase out of The Greed is Good?
Greed is good.
Gordon Gekko?
Gordon Gekko. And was it something like Lunches for Wimps? I think that was another phrase. I mean, just classic. And I think Michael Douglas got the Academy Award for that movie. Thinking again about the Academy Awards, but it's a classic movie. And really, really, recommend that, to see that kind of culture of the 80s when... directed by Oliver Stone as well, one of my favorite directors. So it's a classic movie. Yeah. So The Big Short, Wall Street... Classic movies. Jay, I've always been a fan of Tom Hanks. I don't know about you, but classic actor. And anyone that's seen Forrest Gump, one of his best loved movies, may well be familiar with the reference to Apple that I'm about to make. But
funny enough, I have it queued up. on our my Apple TV that my son. I want to show it to my son as a classic. Him and I are going through some of the classics, and I have that queued up now.
You got to watch it. So it will be his first time. He's never seen it before.
He's never seen it before.
So for anyone not familiar with the movie, in one scene, Forrest Gump speaks about his friend Lieutenant Dan making an investment in Apple on Gump's behalf. Now, online, you'll see a wide range of figures quoted for how much that investment in Apple would be worth today. But let's just say it's a very high amount. Jay, I know you've mentioned Forrest Gump, but were you familiar with that reference to Apple? And while we're at it, do you have a particular favorite Tom Hanks movie?
I loved the movie Big. Tom Hanks, the movie Big, which I thought was absolutely genius.
Yeah.
But the reference to Apple, I had forgotten about it until you mentioned it, and I just remember him opening the envelope, and there's sort of his investment in a fruit company, and the logo, the Apple logo, and everyone in the audience laughing and clapping because it was such an innocent moment for him that he thinks he's investing in a fruit company, but rather a big tech company. And I thought it was absolutely genius how they sort of tied that into the movie.
Fantastic. And Jay, I got to mention, and listeners, if you're wanting to watch a Tom Hanks movie, this may not be one to watch with your kids, but Bachelor Party. Have you seen Bachelor Party? Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it since I was younger, but I wonder, did that hold up well? Did it hold up well?
Yes and no. I mean, it's classic. There's many great jokes, but it may have dated a little. I think I watched it last year, but
oh really?
Still one of my favorite Tom Hanks movies. He's so young. I think it's early 80s, and it's classic Tom Hanks movie. But I'll have to rewatch it. But I certainly won't be watching it with my kids. Certainly not for quite a few more years yet. Let me put it that way. All right, so. Jay, Forrest Gump was released in 1994, and 1994 was an extremely good year for one of your fellow countrymen, Jay. Jim Carrey, a fellow Canadian, seemed to have an amazing 1994. I mean, in that year alone, the following movies were released: Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber.
So they all came out. They all came out in 1994.
What a tremendous trip! Can you imagine all three of those movies came out in 1994? Jay, do you have a favorite from those three?
Well, I have to say, we talked about movies not holding up well. My son and I went back. We're watching again some of the classics, and we went back and watched Ace Ventura. I hadn't seen it in a long time, and I would probably say it's one of those movies that didn't hold up so well. And my son was like, "Why are we watching this?" But we also watched Dumb and Dumber, and we both thought it held up so well, and it was so genius. It was absolutely hysterical. The jokes back then held up well to jokes today. It stands up really, really well.
That's fantastic. And just going back to movies that perhaps don't hold up so well. I mean, growing up, I was quite a big Alfred Hitchcock fan. We mentioned Psycho earlier. But, I watched North by Northwest a few years ago, Cary Grant movie. I think it's 1957. And it just didn't sound. It just took a long time for the plot to move along. It just seemed to drag. Have you seen North by Northwest at all? No. I mean, famous scene of a crop duster. Cary Grant's character's there. He's chased by an airplane in the sky. But it just, compared to when I originally watched it, it just didn't blow me away. It just seemed to drag. The plot seemed to move very slowly. But I want to bring conversation back to Dumb and Dumber, because I'm a big fan of Dumb and Dumber as well. Okay, so when I reflected upon those three Jim Carrey movies, Dumb and Dumber, The Mask, and Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, I couldn't help but find a connection between Dumb and Dumber and the realm of investing. Stick with me, listeners. You may be bewildered now. You may be thinking, where are you going with this? Okay, but please, listeners,
I'm curious, where are you going with this?
Trust me on this one. Okay, so Dumb and Dumber, of course, features Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels playing two bumbling adults with a lack of common sense and little worldly experience between them. So there's a scene where Lloyd, Jim Carrey's character, an incredibly unsophisticated man, has finally been able to track down a beautiful woman named Mary. And incidentally, here's a fact for you. The actress who plays Mary, I believe he married her in real life. They're no longer together, but I actually believe he married her in real life. I read that recently. So he asked Mary if there is any way that the two of them could end up together as a romantic item. And displaying an admirable sense of tact, Mary initially lets him down gently with several, what you may say, evasive answers. Eventually, though, Lloyd insists upon a firm answer about his true chances.
Can we do the exchange? Can we? You and I sort of. I think we should run through it.
As a Canadian, and Carrie's a Canadian. Would you like to be Lloyd?
I'll be Lloyd. You be Mary.
Lloyd. All right.
So it starts. So the scene starts off. So it's like, what are my chances?
Not good.
You mean like 1 out of 100?
I'd say more like 1 out of 1,000,000.
So you're telling me there's a chance? It's hard not to laugh when I'm doing this.
I know. I mean, this exchange is great. I love it. I mean, classic. I mean, this is just such an amazing exchange between those two characters, okay? So, listeners, at this stage, you could be forgiven for wondering what the connection to investing is. Well, something that struck me when I first watched this scene is Lloyd's sense of optimism, So, despite the numerical odds being overwhelmingly against him, Lloyd determines that there may be a chance at love after all. Okay, so it may not be much of a chance, but certainly enough of a chance in Lloyd's own mind to be a notable cause for celebration. 1 out of 1,000,000 truly are 5 words that should be enough to crush any man's soul, but not Lloyd. Lloyd's different, His enduring sense of optimism will enable him to continue to pursue the woman of his dreams despite the overwhelming numerical odds against him. So let me be explicit now about the connection to investing, in case you're wondering. I think we can agree that Lloyd's sense of optimism seems entirely irrational. However, Lloyd remains resolute and positive in the face of seemingly insurmountable numerical odds. So my appeal to you, the listeners of this podcast series, is to instill your approach to investing with an impenetrable sense of optimism. After all, if we heed the lessons of time, the fourth bedrock principle of the Sloth investor, we can see that by remaining optimistic and honoring the principle of time, i.e. patience, you could say, the results of investing with a long-term mindset can be truly remarkable. Through the good times and the bad, the inevitable ups and downs of Mr. Market, remaining optimistic is an essential ingredient for investing. Investing your hard-earned income in a low-fee, globally diversified collection of companies for many years is the rational approach to investing that has far better odds of success than 1 out of a million. Sorry, Lloyd. Therefore, given the odds in your favor, isn't this cause for optimism? Jay, what are your thoughts about this analogy between Dumb and Dumber and a realm of investing? This need for optimism.
Yeah, you mentioned it, the sort of the idea of the low fee and the broadly diversified. Right now, it's hard to have hope. It's hard to be optimistic. Environmentally, politically, the world seems to be fighting with each other. The countries seem to be the infighting in a lot of countries seems to be more polarized and extreme than ever before. But the world, I believe the world has gone through this.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a broadly diversified, low fee investment strategy, and to me, if you have that, there's no reason to not be optimistic.
Yeah.
And I would keep the optimism, because the world has been through tough times like this, and we're not the first. It's not the first time we've been there. We've been here.
That's for sure. That's for sure, Jay. Now, Jay, I've got a revelation. It's a bit of a disclosure. I'm a big fan of Jerry Seinfeld's stand-up comedy. I'm a big fan of Curb Your Enthusiasm, created by Larry David. And Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David are, of course, the two individuals that were instrumental in creating the classic American sitcom Seinfeld. And this might sound crazy to some listeners, particularly listeners in America, in North America. I'm yet to fully invest my time in Seinfeld, and I don't know why. I mean, I know it's a classic sitcom, but it's just not something that I've settled down to watch. And I know it's an iconic show, Jay. And Jay, I know you're a fan, and the reason I bring this up is because of an episode entitled The Stock Tip. And I know we're cheating a little here, as it's not a movie, but I think it's worthwhile mentioning this episode because of the great connections to investing. So, Jay, are you familiar with the episode or not?
I'm a big Seinfeld fan, but I don't remember this one particular episode. But I'm interested to hear how you're going to connect this to your podcast. So can you take me down memory lane? Remind me, give me some backfill here on the story.
So I hope I get the details right. But George Costanza, obviously one of Jerry's close friends, he's got this hot stock. Okay, it's called Cendrex, and this hot stock, and it's been going up and doing well, going up on a daily basis. And he suggests it to Jerry, and Jerry becomes interested, and Jerry invests in this company too. And of course, we know what happens, don't we? Okay, the stock, starts to plummet, starts to go down. I think on one particular day, they mentioned it plummets 6 points, and Jerry gets nervy, and he's worried. And then, of course, what happens is Jerry panic sells, okay? And he admits to his girlfriend within the episode that he's lost $4,000, okay?
Well, I've been down that road. It sounds familiar.
I know.
Panic selling.
Yeah. And of course, let's think about this. Let's think about the cognitive biases that affect investors. And we think about that classic book by Daniel Kahneman that was released several years ago now, Thinking Fast and Slow, and the fact that they mention in that book that losses loom larger than gains, okay? And that's obviously that sense of loss aversion has affected Jerry there, okay? He panic sells, he loses $4,000. And of course, what happens to George Costanza, his close buddy, the things start to reverse, and the price of the stock of Cendrex goes up, and George sells, he gets his money back. But a classic case of recency bias as well, the fact that we can look at a stock, it's going up, and we think, it's a hot stock, we need to invest in it. And then, of course, it plummets,
He's remained headstrong.
Yeah.
George remained headstrong.
Yeah, and I guess, we can touch upon here, not speculating. If you're going to invest in an individual stock, well, do your due diligence, know what you're investing in. If you are going to invest for the long term. But I need to rewatch it. The stock tip, guys, is the name of the episode. No doubt some of our listeners may be more familiar with the episode than myself, but I know it's a classic episode.
I'm going to go back and watch it now.
Yeah, the stock tip. It's a really fascinating one. And just the fact that we can make so many connections to temperament and recency bias, loss aversion, so many biases that affect investors. So definitely
And that's not good. That's not good for your investment strategy.
Yeah, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So Jay, I'd like to make one final reference now between a world of cinema and investing. And we touched upon Apple a little while ago. And a few years ago, I watched a movie directed by Danny Boyle, starring Michael Fassbender, quite simply entitled Steve Jobs. And there's now been a few movies about Steve Jobs. There's one by Ashton Kutcher. I think it was simply titled Jobs. This one is entitled Steve Jobs. Okay, so within this movie, entitled Steve Jobs, directed by Danny Boyle, starring Michael Fassbender, like I mentioned, you'll see Jobs, the creator of Apple, wearing his iconic blue jeans and a black turtleneck t-shirt. He commonly wore these clothes during his new product demonstrations, for example, when he was demonstrating a new iPhone, for example, a new model. So Walter Isaacson, the author of the authorized biography of Steve Jobs, had this to say on the late Apple CEO's wardrobe habit. Begin quote. He, Jobs, also came to like the idea of having a uniform for himself, both because of its daily convenience, the rationale he claimed, and its ability to convey a signature style, end quote. So it's perhaps fitting that this is the final movie example that I provide, as at the current time of writing, Apple is, after all, frequently the largest position in most low-fee, globally diversified ETFs, which is the key portfolio holding that the Sloth investor advocates for investors young and old. So let's now dig a little deeper into the rationale for Jobs' clothing of choice. So a chief reason for Jobs' uniform of blue jeans and a black turtleneck t-shirt was to avoid what we may term decision fatigue, or to put another way, it was to reduce information overload. So the reason why the concepts of decision fatigue and information overload are worth discussing here is because of their relevance to the approach to investing that I advocate, which is, of course, an approach that fundamentally underpins my investing philosophy. Quite simply, by investing in a low-fee, globally diversified ETF, you significantly reduce the potential for information overload to unduly influence the investment decisions that you take. Why? Well, let's consider the alternative route. If you choose to embrace the notion that you can skillfully assemble a relatively small section of businesses, then this comes with a resultant consequence. The consequence is that you have to continue to monitor the operations of these businesses. Are they continuing to grow revenues? Are they staying ahead of their business rivals? Is there plenty of room for the business to grow into the future? As the shareholder of these companies, these are just a few of the questions that you must continually seek to assess. Alternatively, to avoid information overload, you can choose to adhere to the Sloth investor's first bedrock principle of simplicity by simply buying a low-fee, globally diversified equity ETF on a consistent basis through good times and bad, known as dollar cost averaging, or perhaps if you're a Brit, for example, pound cost averaging. Investing in this manner takes the guesswork out of investing and ensures that you sleep better at night by not having to fret and worry about the complex business operations of a select group of companies. Instead, you can lay your head down on a pillow, safe in the knowledge that you simply own the world. Sweet dreams are made of this. Thanks, Annie Lennox, for that one. So, Jay, do you have any final connections between a world of cinema and a realm of investing?
Well, another Quentin Tarantino movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Brad Pitt plays the character of a stunt double.
Yeah.
And a stunt double, the purpose of a stunt double is to avoid the stressful, dangerous volatility in performing a certain act in a movie.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like we want a stunt double. We want to avoid all of that kind of stuff, I guess, in our investment strategy. And that's just not realistic. we mentioned in a previous podcast, the price of admission of investing is volatility.
Yeah,
and this is what you have to accept, and you have to realize. There's a couple examples. One, I invest in a low cost, globally diversified ETF called HXCN, and it's held up pretty well despite a lot of stocks selling off the last several months. It's held up quite well, and that's because it's so well diversified, and it takes the stress out of it for me. I just know month after month I'm going to put a little bit of down, and I don't stretch myself too thin. And the same thing with a Vanguard ETF that I invest in called MGK. And that's a mega cap. So you talked about Apple sort of being the number one in a lot of index or ETFs, index funds or ETFs. Well, MGKs is mega caps like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple, and that took a bit of a hit recently. But I saw that as things were going on sale.
Yeah,
and so to me, I don't mind the volatility in my portfolio if it's exactly what you say, that globally diversified and low fee ETF or index fund.
Absolutely, Jay. So listeners, I hope you've enjoyed episode 21, Lights, Camera in Action. We had a real blast talking about these movie references. I hope you did. Jay, I think it's time to say goodbye.
All right, everybody, have a good one, and we look forward to seeing you with episode 22.
So long for now, Rum. Bye-bye.
For more tips, follow the Sloth Investor on Twitter at @Sloth_investor.